Today on the podcast, we're talking about resistance. My guest is international communication facilitator, advisor, and coach Leanne Hughes. And she told me that while we often try to overcome resistance, she believes it can be a really good thing. Today, I give her a call to talk all about it.
Hello? We'll do it live. Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff.
Joining me on the phone is Leanne Hughes, who loves creating unpredictable workshop experiences that predictably work. She combines her experience in marketing with her education in human resources and psychology to help leaders create engaging, everyday experiences that are so contagious they scale across teams, functions, and regions. Leanne has facilitated leadership, onboarding, and team development workshops across Australia, Canada, Hong Kong, India, Indonesia, Mongolia, Papua New Guinea, and Singapore, and believes in a strengths-centered approach to learning and development. She has over 14 years of experience across a range of industries, including mining, government, and tourism sectors. She's the host of the First Time Facilitator podcast, where she helps trainers and facilitators book out 5 workshops for every workshop they deliver. And I'm so glad to have her on the podcast. Leanne, welcome.
Shane, I always love talking to you, so thanks so much for another opportunity to have a great chat.
I always feel like when we get the chance to chat, we could talk all day. So I'm expecting this podcast, normally they're about 45 minutes. This one I'm expecting somewhere between 5 to 8 hours. So people who are listening, I would get a coffee and maybe a drink, just settle in. We're going for the long haul. You up for that?
Well, I don't mind a bit of a marathon, so yeah, let's have a talk there, for sure.
All right, before we get into that, let's kick off with some fast facts. So 3 questions. Where were you born? What was your first job? And then what do you do now?
I was born in Brisbane, Australia, but I've lived around Australia and overseas. My first job was working for a local swimming pool. So in years 11 and 12, I just worked from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. I get paid in cash and just let people in, make hot dogs, and serve them treats. It was great.
I love asking this question because the amount of responses and the diversity of responses I get from people. Now, there's obviously the usual suspects like, dropping off in newsletters or newspapers. But then you get ones like this, which is, I'm like, that's a really cool first job.
It was amazing. Yeah. I never used the pool though. Like I've never really been a swimmer. Like what a missed opportunity. But it was lovely.
It is a bit of a missed opportunity.
It was a real missed opportunity.
And so tell me about, what do you do now?
So now I work as a trusted advisor, sort of management consultant for organisations, and I really love, I do love running workshops. I'm also a podcast host of a podcast called First Time Facilitator. So it's really about any of the work that I do, creating sort of unpredictable experiences that predictably work. So
I like
ways
that.
to get attention that actually are backed by science and previous experience. Yeah.
Yeah, see, this is the reason why we get along so well. I honestly love your work and love your ability to be able to hold space for people in a really safe way, but also in a really energizing and creative way. And people who maybe are listening because they know you, they would see everything that you produce, and it's super creative and it's fun and it's energizing. But you're also you're just really, really good at what you do. But here's the thing: when I reached out to people to invite them on the podcast, I usually ask them, like, give me one thing that's really exciting for you now, or give me a big word that you'd love to talk about. And you wrote the word resistance in the thing, and you didn't give me any other context or any other information about that. Now, I have to ask, did you write the word resistance because that's your way of saying I refuse to participate in this? Or did you write the word resistance because it had some other meaning for you?
It genuinely, it was such a powerful question. I know you might think it's just an innocent question that you're asking, like, what's a word that you're really passionate about, that you really want to talk and riff about? And I think at the time when I submitted that, maybe I was going through a lot of internal resistance on what I was thinking about. And I just took it, like I do with everything, I took it a layer above and went quite meta with it. And I thought, if there's anyone that I could talk to resistance about, it would be Shane. And as an explorer, as opposed to being the expert on overcoming resistance, but I find it plays out a lot in the work that we do, how we show up as business owners, as well. It's constantly like this battle, right, between what we should be doing. Resistance plays out every day.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. The most recurring conversation that I feel like I have with people, especially when they reach out to engage someone like a coach, right? So coaching is probably the space you hear it the most. They come out, they approach you because they say, I feel like I want to be somewhere that I'm not, and I just don't know how to get there. I feel stuck where I'm at. I'm stuck between this place of where I want to be and where I'm actually at. Has that been your experience with people?
All the time. All the time. And like even going it through myself, and when you're stuck and when you're in limbo and when you're not too sure, it's like life purgatory. It's like you don't know, it's hard to manage time. It's hard to accept or deny commitments because you're like, will this be the opportunity that leads me to where I want to go? Like, will this help me get unstuck? Nothing's certain in life. So yeah, absolutely. I think people, it can be a really frustrating time and you feel like maybe I'm trying all these things. I don't know what that North Star is yet. So what am I meant to be doing?
What do you think for people who are listening to this conversation and going, okay, when you talk about resistance, like it's a very broad concept, a very broad term. Like, what do you mean by resistance?
Yeah, well, I think if I talk about the work that I do, let's just talk about workshops, right? So a lot of my podcast about facilitation, where people really struggle is how do I get people to come to my workshop? We call them like hostages, right? They've been told by HR they have to be there. So what I find in facilitation, I find a lot of life skills out of it. So the first sort of part of that session is actually overcoming, and again, I want to distance that word, overcoming the resistance, but also making it easy for people to feel comfortable and engaged to participate. So you think, okay, so what are the steps that I'm doing and framing in that workshop to make that happen? Something that I spoke to you about, Shane, just earlier was that unpredictability. So what we happen and what we see in life is things have a certain way of being. So when you go into a workshop, you think, all right, I'm going to get there. The facilitator will come up the front of the room or the virtual Zoom room. They'll introduce themselves. They'll talk about housekeeping and, start going along. And then I try and sort of pattern interrupt that and think, okay, if that's the format of this session, what can we do differently? So it's not overcoming the resistance. What it is, it's like breaking the pattern down and going, what could I try that's a little bit different here and do the opposite in order to get the attention? So if you think, okay, so if you take that and you bring it into your own life, what I think we've got to do to overcome our own resistance or frustrations is how do we start breaking that pattern? And I think that's why coaching, you talk about this is in the context of coaching, why people come to you is they're just sick of the same thought process and pattern happening. It's like, even with work, I'll for 15 minutes, I might just be scrolling down a Google Doc and not writing anything, not making any, I'm not making any progress. I've got to pattern interrupt and say, Leanne, this is not working right now. Go for a walk.
Yeah.
Right. And so with resistance, it's not about necessarily pushing through. Like people might say, oh, just sit down, don't leave your seat, just push out those 800 words. But I find that if I just go out for a walk around the block, again, it's a great pattern interrupter. Come back and write 1,500 words as a result. So it's thinking about ways that are kind of counterintuitive to make progress.
It reminds me, I know there's a great book called The Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath. I'm not sure if you've read it. They talk about that in a similar way. They use the language of break the script, right? Which is that internal script that we have, that this is how this situation is supposed to play out, that we prepare ourselves and we brace ourselves for, right? So you go, okay, well, I've got an executive offsite, and immediately that you use those words, you know exactly what it looks like. You're going to a hotel somewhere, you're going to go into a boardroom table, you're going to sit around that table and you're going to, put sticky notes on the walls, and everything inside your script is already there. And so if that's not something that excites you or energizes you about the thought of that, immediately you face that internal resistance, right?
Yes. And then you wonder why. That's a good question to ask yourself. It's like whenever I encounter that resistance to a task or to a project, I think, why am I feeling this way? Actually, my friend, our mutual friend, Steph Clark, I think I was venting to her one day and she's like, why is this bothering you so much? And I always ask them, when things aren't working, or I'm like, why am I not excited about this? I ask myself that question. It's a self-coaching activity to do that. Yeah, because you're right, because I am driven by, we're also strengths geeks. My number one is ideation. And it says, I get frustrated when people say we do things because we've always done it this way. I hate that.
Another reason we get along, my number one is ideation. This is probably why we connect in so many different ways. I think the way that we've always done things is the most frustrating phrase. I think it's frustrating for anyone, but for people who are high ideation, who go, could we connect the dots in a new way? Could we try something a bit different? Hearing that language is almost like an immediate internal resistance, right? So
yes,
I think number one, like thinking through is in the context of wherever I'm at right now. If I'm a leader of a team and I'm wanting to bring people into a space and kind of reduce the resistance that's required to get them into the space where they're at their best, what do I do to make sure that I'm not doing the same predictable script over and over again? I remember there was a story of I think it might have even been in the Power of Moments, where they said they brought the whole staff together, brought them to the place where they would normally do their retreat, then put them all on buses and sent them somewhere else. Or they went into a session and at the end of the session, they turned all the chairs around and made them face the other way in the room. So like just simple things, like little like spontaneous things that you do that just kind of can reduce that internal resistance.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're right. And often what we see is, again, at a micro level, it would be, if I was a leader and I wanted to achieve that, the go-to would be send out a meeting request for 9 a.m. on Tuesday. This is the Zoom room, and I'll call it, team alignment session, right? It's like, break that. I mean, why does it have to be, could it be a phone call? Could it be a virtual coffee, or happy hours are a bit overdone right now? Think about the time. Like, again, it goes back to that purpose, but what are you going to call it? Could it be something like, I don't know, Olympic celebration ceremony? Like let's share what our favorite Olympians did and then re-engineer that for I don't know, I'm just thinking on the spot here, but it's just questioning, as you said, the structures that are already formed. Because if you were to send that meeting Tuesday, 9 o'clock in the morning, everyone else comes in with that baggage as well. And everyone else will sort of conform to what that setting suggests. So by changing the name of the format, you're actually breaking that pattern. And Priya Parker talks a lot about this in her amazing book, The Art of Gathering. The event has begun before it has actually begun. So you've got to break your own pattern before you then share that with other people. And it all comes back to intention and purpose.
Oh, I love that. I can't remember. I've been racking my brain to try and think of who it was. It may have been another one of those contexts in Chip and Dan Heath's book, or it could be something that even Michael Bungay-Stanier has talked about, where he was saying, I'm trying to think of who it was, but it was basically rather than sending out we're going to be meeting on Thursday at 8 a.m. Actually, you know who it was? It was Michael Dixon. It was Michael Dixon in his book, Everyday Creative. He said, rather than sending out an invite for 8 a.m. saying strategy session, he's like, send out an invite that just says top secret meeting, tell nobody, meet me in the foyer at 8 a.m. Like that kind of way to just break the script and shake things up right from the start. Now, obviously it comes back to the word of intention and purpose, right?
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that. So I used to work in marketing, and I worked in the Kimberley region of Australia in a marketing role. We were doing a big rebranding project. And I knew that word of mouth within the business was like it was so strong, the word of mouth. And I wanted people to know about the rebranding process, but I didn't want it to be like a top-down approach. Yep, this is how we're going to run it. So I would just do everything as a secret. Like I would tell a few influencers within the business and go don't tell anyone. But I have the region covered. And then a couple of days later, when we actually launched the rebrand, the MD was like, that is the best change I've ever encountered. Like there was zero resistance. Everyone knew exactly what was going on because it was fueled by the top secret approach, which I love.
Yeah, it's so cool. And so, I mean, one of the things we're going to talk through is, from that perspective, there's some really great ways there for someone who might be leading a team to reduce the potential resistance of something. So what do you do? What are the kind of contexts which might elevate and raise resistance? And the question to reflect on is, where might that resistance be coming from really? Like if we dig below the surface of that, like where is that resistance coming from? And is there a way we can interrupt or break that script or change that narrative or intercept that narrative before the resistance rises, right? So really good perspective from a leader's perspective. Like let's flip the lens a little bit and go now at an individual level. So if I'm someone who might be listening, one of my favorite quotes is actually from The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. And he says, what I would say is probably my definition of success. And I think it's probably the best way I've heard it articulated. He said, there are two lives we live. There's the life we actually live, and then there's the unlived life within us.
Oh my gosh.
And between those two stands resistance. And I'm like, that is powerful. Like there is the life that I am currently living, and then there's this untapped potential within me. But what stands between closing those gaps for me is that feeling of resistance of how do I do that?
That's actually my new favorite quote. That's how I'm living now. Thank you so much for sharing that, Shane. That really hit home for me. And I think where it gets harder for any leader or anyone listening here is not when it's super frustrating, that you're in so much pain, right? Because then it's a headache, it's an immediate need to get this fixed. where it can be almost more painful, and this is where I'm speaking from my experience at the moment when I'm repositioning what I'm doing, is things are good. So things are good. And Michael Bungay Senior talks about this in his book, as does Jim Collins, Good to Great. You're doing good work, but you could be doing that great work, which is that unlived potential. But if you're doing good work, it's very easy to get caught in that success trap because things are going okay. But then you think we only have, if you go back to that point from that quote, we only have this one short life. You know, what could you be potentially stopping now or resisting in order to get to that potential? And I think that's where it gets really scary, is in that obviously that comfort zone. I'm sure you'd work with leaders that are just caught in that sort of, yeah, things are going okay, it's mediocre, a bit of apathy there. I don't need to disrupt myself because everything is okay. That can be dangerous.
Well, who doesn't want to live, to some extent, an extraordinary life, right? Like, I think everyone has that inner desire to want to do it. But then you run the risk of, okay, well, what does that actually mean for me? It means I need to push against the comfort of going back to the way things are, right? So one of the phrases that I'll often use with people when they're, I guess, leading change or communicating change is the desire to go there, wherever there is going to be really low when the comfort to stay here is really high, right? So when you've got high comfort here, the desire to want to go there is going to be really low. And so how do we start to tell people not just why here is better, why there is better, but why you can't stay here? Like, by staying here, how do we remove some of the comfort of being where you are? So it goes, hey, if I keep staying here, I'm never going to fulfill that inner desire to want to make a difference. If I stay here, I'm never going to achieve the thing that I really want, which is over there.
Yeah, it's like the wins, not wins. There's something, there's a short-term win that's keeping you there, that's preventing you from going elsewhere. And I think I was actually just talking to Alan Weiss this morning, and we were talking about change, and he said often leaders aren't fearful. They can buy into that future, but what they are fearful of is the journey that will take them there, because that is unknown. So it's great to even just form like a short-term path of like, what are the short-term measures now that can position? It's like that one degree change to get you back on that flight path. But what does that look like? And actually like bringing it into real life daily behavior, as opposed to, we have to change and this is what it means. And I of course, like anyone would fear that.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on something which I think is a really powerful thought, which is the idea of resistance isn't just big picture, long-term resistance, which is I've got to overcome the big resistance that exists from where I am now to where I want to be, but it's also the daily resistance that shows up in order to achieve that. And you did something which I think is like incredible. And last year in 2020, you had set out on a mission to just run a lot, right? Yeah. Talk us through your journey last year.
Well, it was actually just before New Year's Eve. I heard about this challenge, and it was to run 2,020 kilometers in the year 2020. And I thought, oh, that sounds really compelling. I thought I'll just we both use the Nike running app, which we love. So I put a post out on Facebook. I had about 8 friends jump in. We created a Facebook group and just started this challenge. And I honestly started in, all I did to figure out whether I should get involved or not was I got the numbers 2020 and divided that by 365. And I was like, okay, that's what, 5.4 Ks a day. So that's fine. What I failed to recognize is if you miss one day, you're running 11 kilometers the next day. So on weekends, I was doing like half marathons and like my life, Shane, it got to a stage where I was waking up, like literally opening my eyes in the morning and thinking, run.
Just get up and run. Even if it's around the house, I'll get 200 meters in around the house if it reduces my afternoon run.
Yeah. But it was great. I mean, talk about overcoming resistance. I like running, but, and it was great, right? So I had to just do it because I was so committed to that goal. And once you accumulate like hundreds of Ks, you think, okay, I can do this. It's achievable. Let me. But yeah, the daily behavior absolutely changed. Even
was
the
there a
night
moment
before.
like hearing that, like when you go, okay, we've got a few hundred Ks under the belt.
Yeah.
Was there a moment where you went like, okay, like I can do this, and at what point do you feel like that was?
I definitely wanted to do it. I was constantly reassessing. So often I would just find out the daily average. I was using just a calculator to figure it out. I was also mapping out what was going ahead. I think for me, all of us actually in the challenge were really good up to about the 300, 400, 500 kilometer mark. And then people started fading and I was like, that can't be me. Now, luckily or unluckily, COVID hit around March, I think. And that's when, what else could I have done? All I could do was run. So it sort of served in my favour. Then I started doing a bit of travel within Queensland towards the end of the year. That got really tough. But then I always knew that if I had to pull out 20K runs to make up for it, kind of like my university life, it was just cramming. Like if I can just, I really should have done more sort of consistent work. But yeah, I was doing a bit of cramming in November, December.
So one of the things I find interesting about that is that when we think about resistance we feel like is either on or off, right? So it's either like I feel resistance or I don't feel resistance. It should be easy or it should be hard. But yet sometimes it's like intensity elevates and decreases over time. But either way, the resistance is always still there to some extent or some degree, right?
It's always there, yeah. I actually had a friend the other day, I was talking to him and he's a CEO of a business and he was talking about LinkedIn. He's like, oh, I need to do more videos because I just don't have time. And I'm like, that's a cop-out. It's like, we've been talking for 10 minutes. You could have shot 2 videos right now. So it's also defining what the actual resistance is as well. So for me with the running, there's a few things that had to happen. Like I had to make sure my phone and my watch were charged so they could track it. I had to make sure that the night before I was prepping myself for that moment. So it's even, and look, it's one thing that I just have not overcome yet. There's a couple of things in terms of resistance. One is like getting my email newsletter out, prepping on a Sunday afternoon. Doing these things makes my life easier for future Leanne. But like you said, Shane, it's like that daily resistance of making that space so that future Leanne, it's a lot easier to overcome it. Yeah, interesting observation about resistance sort of coming and going, but always sort of remaining like lying dormant there.
So the question that I ask is resistance good or is resistance bad?
Great.
And what do you think people's perspective is on it? Do we see resistance as a community or society? Do we see it as a good thing or do we see it as a bad thing generally?
Yeah, I think it has negative connotations, of course. Like I said, you always hear that phrase, overcoming resistance, as if it's a bad thing. I've recently started Reformer Pilates. That's all built off the back of resistance, like upping the springs, downing the springs.
I've done it. I went, just as a side note to the Pilates conversation, I have a friend who was a Pilates instructor, a Reformer Pilates instructor. And I said, you know what, I'm going to go do it for my posture because I need it because I'm thinking that it's going to just be this easy experience. And I was too embarrassed to go to a class because I'm deeply uncoordinated. And so I said, could you do some one-on-one with me, which she deeply regrets that decision because I was the most uncoordinated person, but I've never been so sore in my entire life. But the entire thing runs on resistance, right?
It runs on resistance, right? Yeah, building muscle runs off resistance. You're having to break down your muscle to build it. So not all things in life can be run through the analogy of reformers in the gym, but I think it's what you do with the resistance, right? So the question that I have to ask myself is, why is it appearing? What does this mean? What I have to restructure in my day or in my thinking or in my, again, what do I need to interrupt? What patterns do I need to interrupt to make this happen? Is it even worth overcoming this resistance? Like, do I really want this? And if I'm not willing to sacrifice like small things to position myself there, maybe this isn't exactly what I want. Maybe that's something that's coming through. So I think it's really important to pay attention to when it comes out. But also I found in workshops, the people that are often most resistant in the workshops, when they actually become engaged and involved, you find the biggest transformation from them. It's when there's apathy and there's a feeling like, oh, I don't really care about this, or I'm in that neutral zone. So I'm actually a big fan of resistance. What about you, Shane?
I think I am a fan of resistance. One of the things that I'm finding is that what I want to try and better identify is what you just said, is like, where does resistance hit for me? And then if I was to hit resistance on something, what does that tell me about my perspective or my attitude or my approach to a particular situation? Do you think, where do you think resistance comes from? Like, where does it rise up? Is it more common in some areas than others?
Where does it come from? Sometimes it just hits me as like a feeling. So let's just say I'm listening to a podcast episode and someone will say, to be successful, you need to work hard. Okay, so I might have a reaction to that. I'll be like, I don't. So there's like that immediate reaction to it. Like, maybe that's true. And then I think, well, crap, I'm not working that hard. I'm not working the 20-hour days that everyone's talking about. Is that what it takes to succeed? But then I might look for other opinions as well on that, and then try and find people that follow that work, live 20-hour, work 20-hour weeks that way. I think it comes from maybe a fundamental, just from that example, maybe it's hitting on some of your values, something that you've been brought up to appreciate, that you hold true. So I like to separate money and time. I don't think they're connected. I don't think they have to be connected. I don't want to run my business like that. So that's where I think the resistance can sometimes form, is it's hitting against your values, or it's triggering something very close to that, or something you've believed in for so long, which then maybe you formed an identity around that. So then it's like, wow, is what I've been believing this whole time right? when you get into ego, it can be quite dangerous. So yeah, detaching yourself from that.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to remember a quote that I saw James Clear write, which I absolutely loved, and he was talking about it through the lens of writing, and he was saying like we avoid writing, something to the effect of avoid writing because it's hard. He said it would be like going to the gym and avoiding working out because it was hard. Like it's like you get better by using the resistance of some of those things.
Yeah, I think, but he talked about identity as well. He's like, if you want to become a writer, just start writing every day. You develop the identity of a writer, right? So same as like that example that he gives of going to the gym every day, even just going, not doing anything, coming back, but just driving there every day, you develop that identity and habit around it. So you can use it in your favor by creating those habits and small things daily to overcome it in the long term. Writing, absolutely, that is the one I need to overcome for sure. And I love that you've got another book on the way, so I'm so envious.
I do. It's slowly coming, and it is one of those things, getting back into the discipline of something. I think that the thing that I constantly reflect on when it comes to resistance in my own life is this idea that if I'm experiencing resistance personally around something that is really meaningful and valuable to me, it reminds me that I'm becoming a version of myself that's different to the existing version of myself. It reminds me that I'm changing and I'm growing and I'm developing, which means that if there's going to be change and if there's going to be growth, it's going to meet up against the desire to want to stay where I already am. And so resistance for me can either serve as a reminder that this is helping me become the person that I want to be, and it's actually developing me into the person that I want to be. Or other times it actually can be that point of like, where is the resistance so strong that it's actually a good signal that's probably not the right thing for me to be doing?
Yeah.
Like, how would you distinguish between the resistance, which is helping you become the version of yourself that you want to be, and the resistance that's actually going to result in some kind of injury, going forward?
I love that. Yeah, the metaphorical injury. I think it's casting that vision of what do you want to be, that unlived life. What does that look like for you? And being quite specific about it. So one thing that I've done, it's a great tool, Jenny Blake. It's called the Ideal Day Mad Lib. So what it is, it's like imagine a day 12 months from now. So you wake up, like, where are you? What time of day are you waking up? What are you doing in the morning? What are you hearing? And getting very clear with what that ideal day looks like. Who are you working with? What projects have you got on the calendar that you can't wait to work on? What clients are you supporting? What are you reading, right? So you actually, going really broad brush here, this Shane completely plays into ideation because we're like, oh, wow, this is the day that I've imagined. Like, I'm at the beach, I'm running around, I'm hopping on a call with, this company, we're talking about these things. I've got a podcast interview with this author. So that's what I have as the criteria for then deciding, is overcoming this resistance of writing in service of what that is. And it's like, yes, because in that vision, I'm a published author. So that would be my criteria for identifying the good versus the bad resistance.
Nice. Well, I saw this activity the other day, which I really loved, which is kind of along the similar lines that you could even add to that experience, which was over the last, week or 2 weeks, whenever you kind of do this exercise, make a list in the right hand, like 2 columns, the right hand column, make a list of everything that you did that you felt like was energizing for you, that was the thing that gave you the most fulfillment, the things that produced the best results, like the ideal life, the kind of life that you would love to be living. Yes. And on the left hand column, just make a list of everything that you did over the last week. And then the third stage is to draw a line between the left-hand side, the things that you did on the left-hand side that contributed to the things that achieved on the right-hand side. And so being able to go through and go, what were the things that I did that supported the life that I want to be living, and the things that actually created the most energy and excitement? And how do I start to remove anything that doesn't connect those 2 dots? Ooh. And like that concept as well. The hardest part is actually just trying to determine the right-hand column, which is what is the things that, if I had my ideal life, or the unlived life within me, or the things that are the most energizing experiences for me, what are those things? Most people don't take time to reflect on that.
No, we don't. And usually we only sort of focus on like where things sort of went wrong, that whole negative bias that comes in. We reflect on, that was a poor conversation, and you'll mull over that, let alone like what went really well. I remember last year someone paid me. We went for a walk by the river. They just paid to pick my brain for an hour, and we drank coffee by the river. And I was like, that was awesome. Like, I love that. But then you think, then the whole reality is like, how do I monetize this? How do I grow this? Right. And then that's the next level. But I think, as you said, that the initial level of defining that is figuring out like those cool moments. Actually, I like the idea of even just looking at your calendar, reflecting. I might even do that after this conversation, going back the month and just printing it out and going tick or cross as a basic start.
Yeah, I know for a little while I did Michael Hyatt's Full Focus Planner, and his whole system is built around your ideal week. And he breaks it down between, I think, front stage, backstage, and off stage kind of like framework, which is what are the things that are like your transactional work, the things that are like customer facing, the things that are like your work days. What are the things backstage, which are like your administrative things that support the things on the front stage? And then what are the off-stage things, which is the things outside of work, the recreational, the things that are more life aspects of the things that you want to do. And part of that was actually mapping out your ideal week. Like, if I could live the ideal week for those three categories, what would I do? I felt like I was really good most of the time at scheduling the front stage, backstage, which is all of my work life. I'm really good at scheduling work life. I was really bad at scheduling life outside of that.
Same. Yes, me too. And now I've like I completely agree with you, Shane. It's just there's one more framework. It's funny because Don Miller also does some work with Michael Hyatt as well, but he takes it a step above that. And I've been doing his Hero on a Mission program this year. You have to write your eulogy. You write your eulogy. So like someone's delivering a eulogy. What are they saying about you? And then, you step it back into 10-year, 5-year chunks. And then every day you go, right, does this map into but like, it's kind of morbid, but how long do we have?
I think it's great. So depending on when this episode goes live, I have a feeling we'll have already heard the episode that I did with Chris Freeman from Design a Decade. And his whole mission is around helping people be intentional around the next decade of their life. He said most of the time we plan our life around 65, and he said it's the wrong number to plan around. And he breaks it down into like, where do I want to be in 10 years time? Like, how do I live intentionally over the next decade? And like, again, like I think the big themes I'm hearing in this conversation is to recognize that in order to be able to close the gap between the life we live and the unlived life within us, we've got to determine like, what is that unlived life within us? Where do we want to be? Like, whether that's, let's talk about it in a more corporate context. Like, as a team, what's the potential of our team and what do I want for our team? Like, for me as a leader, what do I want for me as an individual? What's the unlived potential within us? And then what's the current reality of where we're living? Because standing between those two is some kind of resistance that we need to deal with, right?
I love that question. What is the unlived potential of the team, the untapped potential? And it's really fascinating that a lot of teams, no one asks that question, right? Everyone's putting out fires every single day. You would notice that it's super reactive, day-to-day planning. And when you do that, the resistance I find is always that the time. It's the time, the priorities, the what are you noticing from teams when you ask that question? Like, have they ever been asked it before?
Well, I don't think one of the questions that I typically ask people when I'm in a group setting and I'm doing, facilitation work or training work, I'd say, how would you feel, like more so to leaders, how would you feel if you just decided and told your team that you were just going to take, an hour to 2 hours, this is when we were not in lockdowns, to just go out and sit in a cafe and think about the future? How would you feel telling your team that? And they were like, there's no way in the world I could tell my team that. We are so slammed right now. We don't have any time. Like, it would just feel so luxurious to be able to do that. And I get the sense that the issue for a lot of people I talk to, or the resistance that most people are dealing with right now, is just creating the space to even have the conversation in the first place.
Yeah. I really love this theme of intentionality. There we go. Third time lucky. And a quote that I do love is, if not now, when? Because I did this scenario with leaders. It might be, okay, you've been asked to work on the most amazing project. It's going to take another 6 hours of your time. How do you create the time to work on this project, right? So breakout rooms, they discuss it, they come back and they go, these are the things that we would do. And then I say, why can't you do that now? Like, why couldn't you take that action right now? And it's like they're waiting. I'm not saying that I do it too. I'm waiting for this perfect moment where I'll get a sign that it's the right moment. We've got space. Space never arrives. It has to be carved out. And it's bringing it into today. So like I said, my constant thing, internal dialogue. I need to get my newsletter out. I need to do this. I need to reposition myself. And I'm always sort of waiting for a moment in future. But we only really have now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I wrote an article series or a newsletter series talking about the small things that make a big difference. And one of those themes that I talked about was margins. And my general sense of people is that nobody starts out with a calendar that's overflowing. Like we start out with really an empty calendar, and then we have a finite amount of space. And regardless, we all have the same amount of time. This is the thing that's like still really hard to get your head around. It's like we don't get more time than anybody else. We just put more in the middle. And the danger of putting more in the middle is you get less at the edges. And so what we do is when we put more in, we lose our margins. And those margins are the things that are so helpful for us to be able to get creative and to have that space. I heard someone describe it to me, when you go to school, like what was the whole point of margins? The whole point of drawing margins was so that the teacher could write in the space, and it was where you learned, right? So it was like when you do your work, you need to allow the buffer of the margin so you can reflect and go, what did I learn? What can I get out of that experience, rather than just filling our page from left to right, which doesn't allow any space for us to be able to get more out of it.
I love that. I love the margin thing. I'm going to start drawing margins, actually. That's awesome. Yeah, just like critiquing.
To go back and reflect on, right?
Yeah,
so it's super helpful.
With a red pen.
But I think everyone has the same dilemma, which is I don't have time. Yeah. And I don't think you just don't find time. Like you don't miraculously look at your calendar and go, you know what? Oh, I found some time here. You've got to make that time.
Yeah, and you're right about the calendar. So I've just booked out every Monday, and my calendar's booked out. I just call it Deep Work Monday, and it's just to create that space. It doesn't matter what I'm working on, but I just don't want any meetings or anything front stage on that day. And so I had a Monday workshop this week, which really sort of threw me. It spun me out. But the other thing I look at is, our Prime Minister, John Howard, Obama, when he was president, they got up every morning and they went on the treadmill. John Howard walked around Canberra for an hour, and I think about me. I'm not the Prime Minister. I'm not running a nation. If they can do that, surely I can do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I always see that meme going around that says you have the same number of hours in a day as Beyonce. And I'm like, okay, well, let's just figure that out. Yours is a much more professional response to that question than mine was. Here's the question that I heard you say a little bit earlier on, and I put it in the back of my mind and went, okay, I'm going to bring that later on, which is you said, I don't love this idea of talking about overcoming resistance. And then we moved on in the conversation. I want to come back to it because we're talking about right now about how do we start to reduce the resistance between the life we currently live and the unlived life within us as an individual or as a team, the potential that we could achieve. So then is it about overcoming resistance? And if it's not, what is it?
Well, I like finding different ways, right? So rather than just going the highways, like what's the sort of the scenic route or the back way? Like what's the way that would resonate most with the way my values, the way that I work, the way that I'm energized. So there's no one way to get somewhere. But so writing a book, some people need a retreat. They need to go away and hide in a cave for 8 months. Some people can just write 500 pages a day. There's different ways of getting somewhere. So I think instead of overcoming, and I guess when I was thinking about that, it was maybe in the context of when people are trying to drive change in an organization, they always say we need to overcome the resistance. What they're sort of devaluing is where the person is coming from. Like we need to inspire them to come to our side rather than what is playing out. Like how do we bring that person along? Just the word overcome, I find it's like I need to win this debate. I find it quite status related, like in terms of overcoming, dominating, as opposed to listening, understanding, working with. Yeah. It was just maybe more a linguistic thing.
I like the word working with resistance rather than trying to overcome resistance because I think the word overcome feels like it's something we need to eliminate. Working with allows us to go, actually, resistance is something that helps me. I have this conversation a little while ago with someone. I said, if I was to imagine running 10 kilometers, ask me a year ago or even 18 months ago, if you said, hey, I want you to go out and run 10 kilometers, I would say, there's no way. Like I can't even imagine that. Now I ran a marathon in 2013, so it's not like I can't visualize that it's possible. But if you asked me 12 months ago, there's no way in the world I could have done it.
Yeah.
Asked me to get out and run 500 meters, I go, yeah, I could do that. But it was tough. It wasn't easy. Then over time, running further, running longer, developing that, kind of just working with that resistance every day. Now to run 10 kilometers, it's a different conversation.
Yeah.
But between those two lives that I wanted to live, I had to work with resistance in order to achieve that. If I didn't want resistance or if I felt like it had to be overcome in some way, there's no way in the world I would have just kept going.
No, No, it's not something. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's probably the problem as well. Is like we see something as this huge. I mean, we all know about chunking things down, and what is that sort of thing that you can do at the smallest level in order to get there. Yeah, that's a great analogy with your 10K run as well. And yeah, I do think working with is actually way more powerful.
So going back and thinking through this conversation, there is so much gold in this. There's so much value. I'm hearing a lot of the big themes coming through in all of this is to really understand that resistance isn't a bad thing. Like we don't have to fear when we come up against resistance. The question to reflect on is, why am I experiencing this resistance? Like better understand and develop our relationship to resistance.
Yeah.
Then once we can understand it, we can go, actually, what could this teach me, and what is this developing in me, and how is it helping me, or potentially getting in the way of me closing the gap between the unlived potential within me and where I'm currently at. I mean, if we were to kind of land this on some, something that you think is like a practical or accessible next step for a person who's bumping up against resistance right now, there's so many practical things, but like just one thing that you might leave someone with to kind of help them to work with resistance rather than feeling like it needs to be feared or avoided.
Oh, such a good question and great recap, by the way, of what we spoke about. This has been super exciting. I wasn't too sure where we were going to head with this, but I feel like I've got some things solved. So I would just say, when you encounter that resistance, first of all, don't blame or judge yourself and feel bad about it, because that's not going to get you anywhere. It's take a step back, find that margin, I guess, as you would say, Shane. Find that margin, take a couple of minutes just to think about, okay, why is this happening? Is it related to where I want to be? Is this the problem? Like, do I really want to overcome this, or am I just doing it because I feel like I have to? Reassess and then think, what is a low ease way that makes sense for me that I could then start making some progress towards this? And you might have to break your pattern of thinking and way of working. So it could be like my pattern is usually just going for a walk, getting some fresh air. I usually find that resolves like 98% of what I'm thinking about and gets me unstuck. But what does that look like for you? And I think, as you said, to work with resistance is to find out how you're comfortable playing with it, recognizing that it's a process. So if you can figure it out, if you get stuck brainstorming, you do that. Could you apply that to other aspects? So just trying to figure out at that micro level, what would that sort of basic tiny step in that direction look like for me if I want to take this and work with this resistance along the way?
So helpful. This whole conversation, I said that we were going to go for 8 hours. I definitely feel like we could go for 8 hours. It's been so valuable and some really great resources in there that you can point people to. Now, I'll put a whole bunch of ways that people can connect with you into the show notes for the podcast. But for people who want to reach out and connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, LinkedIn would be the best way. Love playing around on LinkedIn. I find LinkedIn is just an experiment every day, just a bit of a playground. So love to connect with you there, and my website, leannehughes.com.
Yeah, and people should definitely check out the podcast. You got like a huge back catalogue of podcasts that people can go back and listen to that are super helpful, super engaging, and I think you're extremely clever, and so it's apt that you're on phone calls with clever people. Leanne, thanks so much for joining me.
Shane, thank you so much. What a delightful conversation.
That's it for another week of phone calls with clever people. Thank you so much for taking the time to invest in you by checking out the podcast. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the episodes as they're released. And of course, I'd love to hear how this has added value for you in the reviews. Have a fantastic week.